Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elisa Nolli. I'm the Business Development Coordinator at the Chamber of Commerce Brasil-Canada, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. In the second edition of the Brazilian Week CCBC Online Festival, we brought together several partners to present a wide range of activities and business opportunities in different sectors. With no further ado, I now have the honor to call Giovanni Falseta, Partner Compliance and Investigation at Tosini Freire Advogados, and Flávia Multa, Director of Assurance at B3, who will be speaking of the evolution of compliance, anti-corruption rules, practice in Brazil, and their impact on the capital markets. Giovanni, Flávia, the stage is all yours.
Lisa, thank you very much. I believe I cannot start. Oh, there you go. Great. There you go. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Lisa, for the kind presentation. So our idea today is to discuss a little bit of where it all started and where we are at right now in terms of the compliance movement in Brazil. So I'll try to discuss a little bit more about the compliance aspects of it, and Flavia will be completing our discussion here on the on several other aspects that are important in terms of foreign investments, and also to show you a little bit more on what we've been developing the last few years. So I will just share my screen. There you go. I believe you can see now the presentation, right, Elisa?
Yes.
That's great. So I want to discuss a little bit with you and put some things here for us to have in mind, right? So what happened in Brazil in the last few years in terms of compliance, and what was the movement that we had here? We started, and I'm taking also track of the time, we started in 2003 a movement towards more transparency. And that was how it started. So it changed everything in terms of how we saw not only compliance, but also corruption. So it started from 2003 with several legislations and got us where we are today. But more than legislation, what changed in Brazil in terms of compliance and in terms of governance also was that we had much more enforcement in these particular few years. So we grew 7 years we grew 70 years in 7. So the first part of it was the enforcement made by Lava Jato, by car wash, as you know, right? So you see here multiple elements and multiple coverage of what happened in Brazil. But it was much more into it. So we started this movement in 2003, and the case gave a push, gave much more to us to discuss in terms of the anti-corruption enforcement that we had so far. So it was the last element that we needed, real enforcement. Moreover, at the same time, we had a Brazilian Clean Company Act into force, right? It's very much, let's say, it's very much similar to the CFPOA that you have in Canada. The difference is the CFPOA in Canada, it's much more focused on foreign corruption. And you have the Internal Criminal Code in Canada dealing with the acts of corruption internally. And those laws, those Canadian laws, they are huge components of criminal aspects on it. So it goes not only to the side of the liability of the individuals, but also criminal corporate liability. We don't have criminal corporate liability in Brazil. That's an important feature to have in mind. But we have what we call the Brazilian Clean Companies Act in Brazil. There is civil and administrative liability, but with a strict liability regime. What does that mean? It means that if you committed any of the acts or promised to commit any of the acts that are listed over there, you could be held liable for it, even if you didn't have the intent of doing so. So that's one of the key features that changed the landscape in terms of corruption and public procurement issues in Brazil after this law was enacted. So we had that particular law enacted, and it provides this kind of liabilities, not only for corruption of domestic or foreign public officials. So here in a comparison with the Canadian law, it's a little bit of a mix of it in the civil side, and also the fraudulent practices in connection with public tenders. So it has two ways of looking at it: the public tender part and the corruption of domestic and foreign public officials. This particular law has also another feature that you'll see in a very similar way in the Canadian law. So you can have here fines that could go from 0.1 to 20% of the gross revenue of the company. And if the foreign company was also part of the illicit act, could reach also the company. And it could also provide you with a debarment, right? So you could be debarred, and that debarment, as you know, could also go towards the not only the particular government in Brazil, but also multilateral banks. So it would be across departments. So that's the landscape that we have, and we've been developing much more since then. It changed how we see compliance and how we see corruption in Brazil. Not only that, the communication with foreign authorities, the international cooperation also changed. And you can see here, I left the link for you on your right. If you want to take a look at it, we cannot translate it because it is an official document, but you will see that the international cooperation that occurred in Brazil is tremendous. So you can see here on the yellow side, 497 requests made to 58 countries that Brazil made, and 653 requests received from 41 countries. So for example, here, Brazil received from Canada, Brazil made to Canada 7 international cooperation requests, most likely related to 7 different cases that were ongoing in Brazil. So this interaction occurs a lot, and that's also something that's changed over the years. Talking a little bit about the last few years, right? And what we will see, so we can discuss more and talk about trends. So we've seen this particular law, the Clean Company Act, that brought the leniency agreements that's similar to the agreements that we have elsewhere. So in the US, in the UK, in France, so agreements that you can do with the authority in order to admitting some part of your guilt, but also closing this page and moving forward. So we see that the use of these leniency agreements is get much more sophisticated in Brazil in similar ways to the US. We've seen a lot of rulings in the last years that impacted the prosecutions in the car wash, but it didn't impact the rising and the discussions that we have on compliance. And we have a new Brazilian anti-crime reform that did an amendment on our Whistleblower Act, which also, as you know, changes a lot what we do. So the Whistleblowing Act that provide reward in case of recovery of products of harmful acts against the government, among other provisions. So that's very important, and it leads Brazil to another level of enforcement. And, talking a little bit of what would be the next trends, right? Before heading and passing to Flávia. So we have been discussing in Brazil, not only the constant internal investigations that we do, that's normal right now. So internal investigations here in Brazil are requirements that could come from the law, depending on the industry that you are in, that could come from your external auditors, that could be raised even by the press, which is very investigative here in Brazil. But you see that as you would see in Canada. So it's a well-developed institute that helps the company to understand what's been happening internally. We'll see in 2021 and 22 a more intense international cooperation. We've seen from the US side that the new president, not that new, but new President Biden also is putting combating corruption as one of their most important national security issues. So we will see much more enforcement also cross-border into Brazil and in US. Self-report will be much more important. So we'll see here in Brazil that the self-reporting from the companies that find any illicit acts will be much more recognized by the authorities, and we are developing a lot on that. And third parties, right? The red flag approach that we always see. As foreign investors or from Canada or elsewhere, you sometimes rely on third parties to discuss issues or to present yourself into a particular country. We have to be very aware of that. It's no news for you, but a well-documented due diligence procedure could save you some headaches, not only in terms of choosing the right partner, but also not hiring anyone that could be, let's say, problematic and could put you in a bad position here. As you know, as in Brazil, as in Canada, under the CFPOA, you have you cannot say that a third party did that in a position substituting yourself. So I hired a third party to do something and they did something more. They asked for undue advantage, for example. You cannot say that they did that on their own and not suffering the effects of it. In Brazil, it's the same thing. So if you hire a third party here and they are interacting with the government on your behalf, they should know very well what they can do and what they cannot do. And if they do anything that could be considered deemed illegal, they could hold you also liable. Public procurement is also a big issue for us, not only because corruption at the end, so we had a huge wave of enforcement in corruption, and that changed a bit. Right now, we are seeing a huge wave on public procurement. So all the companies that come to Brazil have to understand very much the public procurement proceedings. It's changing pretty much everywhere, right? Due to COVID, we are doing in several countries, we have new legislations relating to public procurement, and it's not different to Brazil. We had a huge wave of COVID procedures that were put in place and are ongoing, but we have a new law also, very new, in terms of the public procurement. It changed the public procurement a bit, made it a little bit safer, but also has its pitfalls. So you should be aware of that. And the compliance programs right now, they are very well developed as a general rule, let's say. Because what happens, due to the huge enforcement that we had and the wave of legislative procedures that come afterwards, companies started to see the compliance programs as not a defense, which we don't have an affirmative defense as you don't have in the CFPOA, but it would lead to the prevention path. And we always discuss this kind of evolution. So right now, we've seen a lot of companies in Brazil, especially listed companies that look for the highest level of governance in terms of the markets. And I know that Flavia will also discuss a bit about it. They are trying more and more to have their prevention systems in place. So we don't have in Brazil a particular failure to prevent corruption or to prevent other particular illicit acts against the government as an offense, but we see advantages in having compliance programs in place, even if it is to reduce a penalty or to avoid completely effects to happen, right? So you have to understand that the compliance programs here are in a let's say in a different shelf right now. So what we are looking for here when we have the evaluations in Brazil about this particular compliance programs. So we are looking much more for efficiency than just a check the box approach. When you have, and this can be used by you in different ways. So either if you are getting into the Brazilian market and doing a post-merger integration, which is always important, putting the Brazilian company to work in the same, having the same tools as you have in Canada or elsewhere. And you have to understand also the requests that the Brazilian government does. So in terms of the efficiency, they will look very much closely to your hotline support, to your hotline if it works or not, if it guarantees anonymity or not. They will look out for your KPIs, understanding your performance indicators in compliance. We are discussing a lot how to insert compliance KPIs also on the compensation mechanism to executives and to the company itself, not only to the executives. And all of that enters also in the ESG spectrum of all the discussions, right? Compliance is a small piece that goes under the governance, the corporate governance umbrella. And I can assure you that we don't have any corporate scandal that was unfortunately uncovered or unfortunately happened and happily uncovered that is not related to a problem in governance, in corporate governance. I see that we have here, to send a question, so it's Elisa. So we should analyze very carefully when we are investing in Brazil or having discussions with Brazilian third parties, either to bring and do an integration with the compliance program that you have in place, aiming to efficiency, or if you are analyzing Brazilian third parties or Brazilian potential partners, to ask for their compliance programs and ask them to demonstrate to you what they did so far and what are the key performance indicators that they have and the key results that they bring. So that would be, I try to rush here, Elisa, to pass to Flavia, but I think I got my 20 minutes bar already in. So I'll stop sharing and stop talking to leave that to Flavia. Flavia, it's a pleasure to share the floor with you.
Thank you, Giovanni. I'll start sharing trying to share my screen here. Please, just a moment.
No
Take it easy.
I'll be taking care here
Okay.
for you. And don't be shy, right, Flavia? They have to ask us questions. Yes, we can see it. Please go ahead. I'll mute myself.
Okay. I try to have my time here. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. As Giovanni said, the discussion about compliance and corruption in general has increased a lot in Brazil recently. And I will show you an overview of this discussion at capital markets. Please feel free to share with us your questions, concerns, or comments. Let me try here. Yeah. As you probably know, Novo Mercado is B3 main listing segment. About 95 or 97% of companies that are preparing themselves to the IPO moment wants to go to Novo Mercado. It was designed, this segment was designed in 2000, 21 years ago, to address some concerns of institutional investors about weakness of corporate governance and minority rights in Brazil. As you can see here, we implement additional corporate governance practice. Of course, it's voluntary. It's a voluntary process for the company, but if the company and their directors decide to go to Novo Mercado, they need to sign a contract with B3, the stock exchange, so we can enforce our rules to them. And of course, the company needs to adapt the bylaws of the company to include shareholders' rights and arbitration. Of course, we have a mechanism of updating or improving Novo Mercado rules or Novo Mercado corporate governance practice. And we conduct this process 3 times, as you can see in this slide. Focus on compliance subject, the most important updating happening in the last revision in 2017, and we will see in more details soon. But of course, engaging listed companies to accept new obligations is not easy as it seems to be. B3 does not have the power to impose new rules. There is a complex process, a restricted hearing, where Novo Mercado listed companies have to vote if they accept or not the revision of Novo Mercado statement. The good news is that when we discussed with them, with the administration of these companies and investors also in 2017, trying to increase obligations about let me see, internal controls, compliance, code of conduct or code of ethics with hotline, internal audit, audit committee, and some policies, especially related parts, transaction policy, we had a great success because each one of these topics were on the table of the companies, were on the table of directors and investors at that time. And they knew that was urgent to do something to help companies to manage in a professional way with it. So in this slide, you can see the number of companies that B3 that we have to deal with along each revision period. Here are the main rules that we have in place for Novo Mercado companies related to compliance subjects. The first one, compliance, internal control, and corporate risk management. The second line of defense. Here, these structures must be kept segregate from its operational areas in order to preserve independence of these activities. The second column is about a typical 30 line of defense, internal audit. And the last one, audit committee, we have discussed this topic in 2011, and the companies did not accept the revision. Now in 2017, they said yes to this obligation, and here we have a board, independent and autonomous advisory board, that receive and treat this information on non-compliance with regulations at all. And we have a prohibition in Novo Mercado rule that it's not accept the participation of executive officers from the company and from the shareholder controller or affiliates or subsidiaries of the company. But of course, Novo Mercado is not the only way to improve corporate governance in Brazil. The IBGC has a huge role engaging directors, investing on executive education and advocacy. Since 1999, IBGC has had its own code of best practice of corporate governance, but in 2015, IBGC was the leader of many other market participants to create a code of best practice just for public companies. CVM, the Brazilian Securities Commission, has adopted under a rule on a model comply or explain that it's very, very common in other countries. And there we can see a specific chapter dedicated to supervisory and control bodies. Last but not least, as I said at the very beginning, Novo Mercado is the standard of Brazilian market. So smaller companies also desire to go into it. The question is how to enable smaller companies to access capital market in Brazil without compromising corporate governance practice. Considering that the implementation of control bodies, control structures can be complex for companies, B3 decides to give 12 months to these companies to comply with compliance rules. It is especially important to smaller companies, and more than that, entrepreneurs can concentrate their efforts to deal with pilot fishing, roadshow, and pricing process because they have now a waiver to think about their best control structure after that, after the IPO moment. Finally, I would like to finish today with a positive perspective. Definitively, control and compliance and corruption matters are at the agenda of public companies, as Giovanni also said, and directors are taking it very, very seriously. It's not the end of the path, of course, but I think we can see sunlight over there. Thanks a lot, and I'll stay here with Giovanni and Elisa to answer your further questions. Thanks a lot. Elisa?
Thank you, Flavia. Thank you, Giovanni. I think that everyone is a little bit shy today, but to warm up a little bit, I have a question to Flavia. So, Flavia, companies listed on the Novo Mercado have until August 2022 to fully adapt to the new compliance and control rules. What are the main points of attention for companies and investors?
Okay, yeah, very interesting question, and it's a challenging for the companies because it's easy to say, it's easy to write a new rule for us, but it's tough to implement. Companies or issues related to structure are the most challenging to companies. It's hard to put in place compliance internal controls with a minimum team, minimum staff. Sometimes a company, some time ago, a company told us that they already have a complete structure complying to Novo Mercado rules. But when we started to ask for more details, it was not a huge structure. For example, they answered that the whole staff of compliance team was just one person. So it's a matter of culture too, besides this warning about adequate structure, that you have to think about it, what is the best structure of these components in companies, they have doubts about the implementation of related parts transactions policy, because they have so many other companies at the structure, and they need to manage how to deal with all of them as they are dealing with another company from another group. So I think these are the most challenging questions there: structure and policy of related parts transactions for Novo Mercado companies.
Great. And one more question. How does the process of interaction with companies and other market agents to advance the rules and practice of corporate governance, including those of compliance and controls, in the special segments of B3 or even the governance report work?
Okay, two different ways here. About listed segments, Novo Mercado, for example, companies should vote if they accept or not the implementation of new rule. If 1/3 of Novo Mercado companies do not accept the innovation, the new rule, B3 cannot introduce the adjustment at the regulation. So we need to convince 2/3 of companies to accept the innovation or the new regulation. For the code of corporate governance, for the governance report, 11 entities discussed together the principles and practice. As you can imagine, it was not an easy work to find a good way to address so many different thoughts, directors, entrepreneurs, investors, regulators, self-regulators, companies, corporate governance experts, analysts, everybody together at the same room, trying to put in place a governance report. It was not easy, but we could find a way, and now it's a success in Brazil, I think.
Okay, thank you so much. Giovanni, we have a question for you as well, from Paloma. Giovanni, when you talk about self-report as a prevention mechanism, would that also act as requirement of this improved compliance program trend you mentioned?
Very good. Thanks, Elisa. Very good question, Paloma. So it's debatable, because neither in Brazil or in Canada you have the obligation to self-report. But when you look, especially under the interpretation of the authorities, they tend to say that let's say a full-fledged, functioning compliance program have as part of it the self-report. So when you look at the compliance program and you talk to scholars about it, and I'm not one of those, but when you have this particular discussion, they would say that a compliance program always aims to prevent, detect, and remediate, right? So what we discuss in practice is, when you don't prevent, you have to detect, and when you don't prevent and you don't detect, you have at least to remediate. So if you look at it as a structure, not only of compliance, but integrity of the company, that it's much more than compliance, it's much more to abide by the rules. When you look at the integrity part of it, yes, self-report is a prevention mechanism, so avoiding bigger penalties. And when you look at it, Paloma, you will see that all the authorities all over the globe are also investing much more on self-reporting as part of not only being a good corporate citizen, but also to help the market to develop, avoiding not only corruption, but we are talking about anti-competitive practices, cartels, and so forth. We've seen, right, Flavia, we've been seeing here the CVM and the Brazilian, let's say, equivalent to the SEC, investing a lot on self-reporting benefits. And that's also another, let's say, that's another trend in Brazil. The self-reporting mechanisms are stronger and they are providing you with more benefits. So it makes you willing to do that if you see an issue. Flavia, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
And it's cheaper.
Yes. It's a very good point. It's cheaper. So Paloma, let us know if we answer your question. Otherwise, we can you do a follow up here and we continue. Great.
So thanks, Giovanni. Thank you, Flavia. So continuing on that line, Giovanni, when we talk about acquiring a company in Brazil, what are the main compliance challenges for a foreign investor here?
Oh, it's a lot. It depends a bit on, but it's like buying a company elsewhere. You know, you have to adapt yourself to a new culture, especially if you are not in the country. So you have to know a little bit how the market works. You have to rely on new people to put your business up and running. So I think that the first one, Elisa, would be, so you have to know who to trust. And as I'm a bit skeptical about it, so you have to understand that through documents. You have to understand that this particular third party will help you out and not bringing you some new problems. You already have some, so you don't need new problems. So doing your due diligence on the third parties that you work with, for me, it's a must, and you shouldn't skip that. And you know, Elisa, it's normal, especially when you have such big companies as in Canada, right? It's normal to talk with a company that you know that is exploring the same market and say, hey, who do you use there? And you use that as a recommendation. Sometimes it's exactly that puts you on the corner. So besides all the recommendations that you have, document your step-by-step. Moreover, what we have here, we have been seeing a lot also, is that we still have corruption issues, of course, as all developing countries. We are a high-risk countries. So you have to be very aware of certain issues. So understanding who are the sensitive third parties that you use, consultants and so forth. Understand all the relationships that you have, map all the relationships that you have with the authorities, and do a good homework on that to understand where they are and doing that under the same conduct that you do at home. And additionally, I would say that Flavia mentioned it, but I would stress it even more, the line of defense, right, Flavia? You have to have a good line of defense. So looking at, of course, the company all starts from it's not an obligation of a particular individual, but from all the company. But having not forgetting an audit function and having strong internal controls will help you in any part of the world. So that would be, if you're talking about a mid-sized or small Brazilian company, that's the challenge you have. Of course, if you are talking about Novo Mercado, Flavia, we always hope to see the best levels of controls and the best levels of audit procedures. So you have a little bit, you have other issues to look around, such as compensation, such as the new structure of corporate governance. And but I would look at those.
Perfect. Thank you. And regarding to Novo Mercado again, I believe that now it's for Giovanni and Flavia at the same time. All companies that enter the Novo Mercado have a very mature compliance structure or no?
Flavia, do you want to jump on that or should I?
Yeah. they need they need to have, because now it's an obligation. Before 2017, 2018, it was not mandatory, but now it is. So a company that want to be listed at Novo Mercado segment, they need to have second line of defense, third line of defense, and they need to have audit committee also. So now and of course B3 check if everything is okay for the company to go into Novo Mercado. For the companies that were listed before 2017, they have a time to adapt the structure, and this period is finishing. So next year, all companies at Novo Mercado needs to have a huge compliance and control structure there. Yeah.
Okay, got it. And
Absolutely agree. Oh, sorry, Lisa. I
no, no,
jumped on the
no,
ground.
no. I was going to ask you if you have like any comments on that.
I have a little bit of delay here, so I'll just start talking with everyone. But Flavia mentioned a thing that is very important. So we are talking about certain obligations that companies have in place. So it's different, right? Because when we talk about having a compliance program, by law, by design, it is not an obligation for most companies. Certain obligations, such as companies that have either they are financial institutions or have a financial angle, they will have much more obligations in terms of money laundering and so forth. So a lot of things that they have to have, and certain compliance obligations. But when you want to enter Novo Mercado, you have to have a strong compliance. Not only, I would say it is not only a compliance structure, you would have to have a strong compliance culture. Because at the end, having a bunch of paper, right? I can go over there and grab a bunch of it. It won't change the culture of the company. So when you have a strong compliance culture, it's natural that you have a compliance structure. Of course, we know, right, Flavia, when you look, no, let's not say right, Flavia, because it could be an opinion. So we know that in Brazil, we have some issues related to companies that try to prepare themselves to go to Novo Mercado and then have to work a little bit more afterwards. So that's a thing that we've seen a little bit more. But in general, the market, and let's talk about the compliance practitioners, so that the category that I'm in, welcome very much the new rules that B3 is promoting, and those are great for the market. We will have when you clean up the field, and you have the same field and the same rules for everyone that want to be in the same conditions, the market always wins, right? You have more security to invest, you have more security to have the better product, the better service, and know that you will win because of it, not because of an undue influence that is proposed or a different structure that you put in place.
And Elisa, if I can complement here, here we have another player, helping us, the investors. They are asking for ESG questions or matters. They are asking for compliance and adequate controls for the company. So it's a huge partner for us also.
Great. So, and I think that's maybe like the last question that we have. So talking a little bit about corporate governance. How is the stage of corporate governance practice in Brazil? If you can talk a little bit about that.
Flavia, should I start? Okay, so as you've seen on Flavia's presentation, right, we've we developed a great deal of things on the last few years. And it's interesting, we've mentioned the IBGC, the Brazilian Institute on Corporate Governance, and it's amazing that the IBGC has been selected as one of the best corporate governance institutes in the world for some time. So it's unbelievable that we did we put such a lot of energy in compliance on the last few years, and we didn't devote the same energy to corporate governance. But right now, I think that, I don't know if Flavia agrees with that, so I'll put the bomb on her lap on that to say, but I believe that we are going from an era of compliance to an era of corporate governance. We saw that compliance was important. We try to implement that. We are going and developing more and more on it, but we are all understanding that the main crises that we saw are generated from the lack of corporate governance. If you have a strong corporate governance, you'll have a strong culture, and you will have less problems of compliance. So it's one of the consequences of the other. But if we try to put compliance down the throat of everyone without developing corporate governance, it won't work. And IBGC is doing a great work on that, not only on the last few years, but it's being stronger and stronger. The IBGC is preparing new board members to help with the challenges of being on Novo Mercado, and preparing them to understand the trends, not only from Brazil, but the trends from all over the globe. So when we have the investors trying to get to Brazil, more qualified investors, those individuals will be not only ready to help them as board members in a global fashion, but also providing local content and helping on local risks. So I think we are going to. I hope that we can discuss, Elisa, next year here on the same event, hopefully live. I'd love to see all of you, and
Yes.
and see that we develop a lot on corporate governance.
Perfect. Flavia, do you have any comments?
Now, just one compliment. I think it will be, we are living now an era of corporate governance, social and environmental matters. I think corporate governance can be the first one, the basis, and we can put social and environmental discussion now, maybe next year.
Nice. So just to wrap up, so as we are talking about ESG, how much of a trend is it in Brazil? What do you think is going to happen next year?
So Flavia, since you have, go ahead.
I think it's happening now. It's we have a new mind now about this topic. It's not voluntary anymore. I think it will be mandatory very soon. I don't know if you agree, Giovanni.
Absolutely, Flavia. I think that's what we've been seeing. So we've passed in a way that in the past, we had a lot of companies not even understanding their impact on the communities. And right now, as Flavia mentioned, it won't be only, oh, it's good to have. It will be mandatory. The more high risk is the industry in saying how much they change the environment, how much they impact the community that they are in, more will be asked for them. So I do believe, as Flavia mentioned, right, from when I see ESG, I always say that G is the glue of all these practices together. that holds everything together. So we will see that more and more, and we will pass, right, Flavia? We have a thing when you have something that is new and no one kind of understand how it works, you have a lot of fuss, but you have a lot of smoke, but sometimes you don't have fire, right? I think that for ESG, this phase will have to pass very fast because you have qualified investors, you have qualified even governments, right, Flavia, when you're talking about sovereign investments and so forth, absolutely requesting specific requirements to close the deal. So we will have not only that, as Flavia mentioned, we'll see that being mandatory. So we will have also performance indicators for that. So we will not only talk about it as, okay, so we are doing all the fuss. No, let's be objective and see how much you are getting back to the community and the environments that you live in, and how your practices duly work in terms of the governance that you mentioned that you have. Let's see now in practice if you have it.
Great.
Will be a lot of fun, Elisa.
Let's see. Flavia, any more comments?
No.
So our time is almost up. But before we close the event, I want to thank you so much, Flavia. Thank you, Giovanni, so much. It was a pleasure to share the floor here with you today. I would also like to thank our partner, the Brazilian Institute of Corporate Governance, IBGC, for the support. Thank everyone that is listening to us today. And we hope to see you all again soon, maybe next year in present.
Hopefully.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Giovanni.
For the invitation. Thank you, Flavia. It was a real pleasure. Thank you, Lisa. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, guys. Bye-bye.